1975, Burbank, California. NBC studio. One shone brightly under the spotlights. The audience cheered as Johnny Carson walked out, his familiar mischievous grin on his face. He was the king of late-night comedy, the master of satire, the man who could make the whole of America laugh with a single witty remark. Tonight, the special guest was Dean Martin, the jolly Italian, the golden voice of the Rat Pack, an old friend of Jerry Lewis and Frank Sinatra. Dean had appeared on The Tonight Show many times, usually with a scotch in hand, a half-drunk smile, and jokes that drew thunderous applause from the studio. But tonight, Johnny had other plans. "Dean Martin, young man? Here again? Or did you get lost from the bar again?" Johnny said, his tone cheerful but slightly sarcastic as Dean walked onto the stage, his usual unsteady gait unsteady. Dean smiled and waved to the audience. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, a loose tie, his dark hair streaked with gray as charming as ever. But behind that smile was a man who had weathered many storms. Divorce, the pressures of showbiz, and the lingering sadness of Jerry Lewis after their 1956 breakup. They sat down. Johnny began as usual, telling a few jokes about Dean, about his drunk performances on stage. Then he shifted to a more sensitive topic. "Dean, you know, I heard you and Jerry Lewis were a perfect couple, but then you dumped him. Why? Was it because you thought you were better, or just because you couldn't stand being overshadowed?" Johnny leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eyes. The audience burst into laughter, but the atmosphere grew heavy. Dean took a sip from the glass of water on the table. Actually real scotch, but he controlled himself well. His emotions surged. Johnny wasn't just joking. He was touching on an old wound, the breakup with Jerry, the brother who had shared the Atlantic City stage in 1946. Dean had tried to mend things, but fame and ego had driven them apart. "Johnny, what are you trying to do?" Dean thought to himself, a smile still on his face. Johnny pressed on. He pulled out an old clip of Dean and Jerry, then commented, "Look, Dean, you used to be straight man, and Jerry was the comedy star. Now you're solo, but do you ever regret it? Or are you trying to prove that you don't need Jerry?" The audience fell silent. Ed McMahon forced a smile. Dean sat still, his eyes fixed on Johnny. Not an angry gaze, but a terrifying calmness. The kind of calm a man who had lived through war, through Hollywood, through sleepless nights worrying about his children. Dean slowly set his glass down. "Johnny, did you invite me here to be a joke? Or are you testing whether I'll break?" Dean's voice was deep, warm, but razor-sharp. The studio suddenly went cold. No one laughed anymore. He was telling the real story, not a script. On their first night at the 500 Club in Atlantic City, 1946, Dean sang, Jerry performed, and they complimented each other so well that the audience rose to their feet. "We're not competing, Johnny. We're brothers, and brothers sometimes argue, but the bond remains." Johnny tried to salvage the situation by continuing the joke, but Dean didn't stop. He rose, walked to the piano, and sang a Joan of "That's Amore," but a slow, emotional version, as if speaking directly to Jerry over the television. The entire studio fell silent. The audience wept. Johnny Carson, a man who rarely lost his composure, sat stiff, the pencil in his hand ceasing to tap. A flashback to Dean Martin's life. Born Dino Paul Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, the son of Italian immigrants. He worked as a boxer, a croupier, then a singer. He met Jerry Lewis, a skinny, explosive young man. They became a phenomenon, making a lot of money, but the pressure of fame wore Dean down. In 1956, they broke up. Dean went solo, achieving success in film, music, The Rat Pack with Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. But the pain remained. Dean thought of his children, Dean Paul, Gina, and the others. He wanted them to see that their father wasn't a coward. In the studio, Dean continued, "Johnny, you're good at satire, but sometimes satire only masks your own fear. You're afraid that one day the audience will turn their backs on you as they've done on so many others." Johnny tried to smile, but his eyes betrayed his confusion. This wasn't the drunken, humorous Dean. This is the real Dean, a strong, loyal friend. The spotlights in NBC's Studio One seemed to dim. Johnny Carson, with a mischievous smile still clinging to his lips, threw out one final challenging question. "Dean, if Jerry were here right now, what would you say to him? Or would you still be avoiding him like you've been all these years?" The studio atmosphere suddenly became stifling. The audience, who had been laughing just minutes before, were now silent. Ed McMahon sat beside him, his hand gripping his water glass tightly, his eyes glancing anxiously at Dean Martin. Johnny Carson, the king of the late night, the one who rarely let anyone turn the tables on him, was waiting, his pencil tapping lightly on the table like a tense drumbeat. Dean Martin sat silently for a few seconds. He didn't rush to answer. His deep brown eyes stared directly at Johnny, not with anger or defensiveness, but with a terrifying calmness. It was the calmness of a man who had once stood on the Atlantic City stage in 1946, alongside Jerry Lewis when both were unknown boys. It was the calmness of Dino Crocetti, the Italian immigrant boy from Steubenville, Ohio, who had boxer for a living, who had sung in smoky bars. Dean slowly set his glass of scotch down on the table. The glass remained untouched. "Johnny," his deep, resonant voice echoed through the studio via the microphone. "What are you trying to do? Did you invite me here to be a joke for the audience, or are you using me to cover up your own fears?" The entire studio held its breath. A whisper escaped the audience. Johnny forced a smile, trying to squeeze in a joke. "Hey, Dean, don't make me." But Dean rose to his feet. His steps were steady, his perfectly tailored black suit clinging to his tall frame. He walked toward the piano in the corner of the stage, where the Tonight Show band sat silently. No one dared stop him. Dean sat down, his fingers gliding lightly over the keys. The first notes of "That's Amore" rang out, but not the usual cheerful, lively version. This was a slow, poignant version, like a whisper from the heart. "When the moon drops its silver light," Dean sang, his warm baritone voice spreading. Each lyric seemed to speak directly to Jerry Lewis across the distance of time and television waves. "When the heart makes you sing, that is Amore." No one in the audience laughed anymore. Many wiped away tears. Ed McMahon bit his lip. Johnny Carson sat stiffly in his chair, his smile completely gone. The studio froze for a moment. The lights seemed to dim, leaving only Dean's voice and the echoing piano. Dean continued singing, his eyes closed as if transported back to 1956. The year he and Jerry broke up because of egos, the pressures of Hollywood, and the long nights in Las Vegas with the Rat Pack. Dean's emotions surged. He remembered Jerry, the skinny, explosively energetic boy who had made him laugh until his stomach hurt. He remembered the nights they performed at the 500 Club, when Dean was the serious, straight man, and Jerry was the whirlwind of humor. "We're not rivals, Johnny," Dean thought to himself as he sang. "We're brothers, and brothers sometimes hurt each other. But the bond never dies." When the chorus rang out, Dean opened his eyes, looking directly into the camera. "Jerry, if you're watching, we're still here. Life is short. Forgive and let's sing together one more time." The entire studio erupted. The audience rose and applauded. Cheers echoed. Johnny Carson also stood up, clapped loudly, then walked over and hugged Dean, a rare, genuine hug on live television. Johnny's eyes were no longer mischievous, only filled with respect and a touch of remorse. Dean smiled, patting Johnny on the shoulder. "Don't force yourself to be sarcastic, kid. Sometimes sincerity is enough." The entire nation, watching on television, witnessed that moment. Ratings that night soared to record levels, but not because of the humor. It was because of Dean Martin's true character. Not the witty drunkard, but a strong, forgiving, and loyal friend. As the studio lights dimmed, the atmosphere backstage at NBC became quieter. Dean Martin stepped off the stage, sweat beading on his forehead. His wife, John, was waiting backstage, her smile a mixture of nervousness and pride. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you." "You did it, Dean." Johnny Carson approached, his hands still trembling slightly. "Dean, I'm sorry. I went too far. The pressure of ratings, the audience demanding drama. But I shouldn't have touched your old wounds." Johnny's voice softened, revealing his vulnerability to a guest for the first time. Dean chuckled, patting Johnny on the shoulder, like an older brother. "You're not the first person to try and bring me down, Johnny. Hollywood is full of people like that. But I've learned that retaliation with anger only makes things worse. Let's have a drink." They sat in the guest room. Real scotch poured. Dean told Johnny about his years with Jerry Lewis. He recounted in detail the first night in Atlantic City in 1946. Jerry's silly antics, Dean's ballads, and the audience laughing until they cried. "We made $350 a week, but that was the happiest time. Then fame came, money came, and we lost each other." Johnny listened, nodding occasionally. He shared his own fears. The fear that one day the audience would get bored. The fear of being replaced by younger stars. "You taught me a lesson tonight, Dean. Satire is a weapon, but kindness is what makes people remember." They laughed together, the atmosphere warming. Frank Sinatra called backstage. Rumors spread quickly in showbiz. "Dean, you did great. Jerry must be crying at home." Dean laughed, promising to call Jerry. Sammy Davis Jr. also sent congratulations over the phone, reminiscing about the nights at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, where the Rat Pack once reigned supreme. But deep down, Dean still missed his family. He thought of his children, Dean Paul, a teenager, Gina, with a smile like her mother's, and the other children. "I don't want them to see their father as a coward," Dean told himself. That night, Dean and Jean drove back to Beverly Hills. The California highway was deserted, and the radio played his old songs. Dean held his wife's hand and recounted the whole story. Jean listened, wiping away tears. "You're my quiet hero, Dean, not just on stage." Dean Martin's Beverly Hills home was warmly lit even late at night. John had prepared a simple Italian dinner, pasta with fresh tomato sauce, garlic toast, and a bottle of red wine. His children were either awake or waiting. Dean Paul ran to hug his father. Gina pulled his arm and asked, "What were you doing on TV, Dad? The neighbors kept calling to praise you." Dean sat down at the table, his voice warm and gentle as he recounted the story. He didn't tell it like a hero, but like a lesson. "Johnny tried to embarrass me, but I chose not to give up, because life isn't always a spotlight. What matters is who you are." He spoke of Jerry Lewis, the uncle his children had met, about the arguments of 1956, about the pain they both endured. "Forgiveness isn't weakness, my children. It's strength. Someday you'll have friends, you'll have misunderstandings. Remember my words. Don't let fame or ego destroy friendship. Dean Paul nodded, his eyes brightening. He dreamed of becoming a pilot. But tonight, he had learned about courage. Gina hugged her father. "I love you, Dad. Sing me, 'Everybody Loves Somebody.'" Dean smiled, his voice echoing in the living room. The whole family sang along. The warm Italian family atmosphere permeated the air. Children's laughter, the smell of food, and unspoken love. Dean looked at Jean, his heart overflowing with gratitude. After all the divorce and pressure, he finally had a real home. The next morning, Dean called Jerry Lewis. The conversation started awkwardly, but gradually became emotional. "Jerry, I sang for you last night. We still have time." Jerry, on the other end of the line, cried, promising to meet soon. It was the first step towards reconciliation, though it might take many years. Dean sat by the pool, looking out at the lush green garden. He wondered about his legacy. Not his hit songs, not his films, but the way he faced challenges, with his character and kindness. In the days following the recording of The Tonight Show, Dean Martin spent more peaceful time in Beverly Hills, but memories flooded back like the Nevada desert winds. He sat by the pool, a glass of diluted scotch in his hand, his eyes gazing into the distance at the glorious nights of the Rat Pack at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, 1960s. The flashback took Dean back to the Sands Hotel Copa Room, 1963. The dazzling neon lights of the Strip, the thick smoke of cigarettes filling the air, and the resounding laughter of the wealthy audience. Dean, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford, the Rat Pack, dominated Las Vegas. Each night they performed was an endless party. Dean sang sweet ballads, Frank led with a cool style, Sammy danced like a whirlwind. That night, the atmosphere was particularly tense. Sammy Davis Jr., his talented friend who had always faced racial discrimination, had just been taunted by some drunken VIP guests. "Hey, Sammy, you sing really well, but why don't you just stay somewhere else?" A loud Texas businessman, his voice slurred with alcohol, shouted. The room fell silent. Frank Sinatra frowned, ready to intervene forcefully, but Dean Martin rose first. Dean walked onto the stage with his familiar half-drunk smile, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Listen, folks, tonight we're in Las Vegas, where people come to forget the stupid. Sammy is our brother, and here at Sands, nobody touches Dean Martin's brother." His voice was deep, witty, yet firm. He pulled Sammy onto the stage, put his arm around his friend's shoulder, and began singing a special duet version of Mr. Bojangles. Sammy danced, Dean sang backing vocals, and Frank clapped, leading the audience. In that moment, Dean not only salvaged the atmosphere, he protected his friend from the silent discrimination of Hollywood and Las Vegas in the 1960s. Dean's inner turmoil was complex. He remembered Jerry Lewis, who had been his first brother. "Life is a circle," Dean thought. "Today I help Sammy. Tomorrow maybe someone else will help me." After the show, in Sands's private suite, the Rat Pack gathered. Frank poured drinks. Sammy recounted his personal struggles, losing his eyesight, the pressures of his career. Dean listened, sharing his own story, from the young Dino Crocetti, working in an Ohio steel mill, to the singer performing in small bars. "We're not superstars forever, brothers. What matters is how we treat each other when the lights go out." The flashback connects to the present. Dean calls Sammy Davis Jr. after The Tonight Show. Sammy laughed loudly over the phone. "Dean, you're still the unsung hero you were that night at Sands. You've completely frozen Johnny Carson." They laughed and talked for hours, reminiscing about Rat Pack memories, tours, and lessons in loyalty. Back home, Dean told Jean and the children about Las Vegas. Dean Paul's eyes lit up. "Dad, tell us more details. How did you save Sammy?" Dean smiled, describing every detail: the smell of cigarette smoke, the thunderous applause, and the warm feeling of being surrounded by friends. "Showbiz life is full of pitfalls, son, but if you have brothers, protect them, whether through song or quiet action." The family dinner was filled with laughter again. Gina played the piano. Dean sang along. Jean looked at her husband with loving eyes. These moments were a healing balm for Dean. After years of divorce from Betty and Kathy, he had finally found true peace. The next morning, Dean Martin decided to keep his promise. He sat in his Beverly Hills office, dialing the familiar number. Jerry Lewis, an old friend, old rival, old brother, was on the other end. Jerry's voice was initially shaky, surprised by the call after so many years of silence. "Dean, is that really you?" Jerry asked, his voice still tinged with his usual wit but mixed with emotion. "Yes, it's me, Jerry. Last night on the Johnny Carson show I sang for you. That's Amore. I think we wasted too much time sulking," Dean said directly, without beating around the bush. He recounted the recording in detail. Johnny's teasing, the studio freezing, and the moment he stood up to sing. Jerry was silent for a long time, then wept. "Dean, you know what? You watched it too. I sat at home, tears streaming down my face. We were kings of the stage. 1946 in Atlantic City. 500 Club. Why did we let Hollywood destroy it all?" They talked for hours. Dean talked about his family, his children, about the Rat Pack nights. Jerry talked about his MDA charity work, about his solo films. "You're still the best straight man, Dean, and I'm still the goofy clown." They laughed, then promised to see each other soon. That was the first step toward their famous reconciliation. Though it would take time, the seed of forgiveness had sprouted that night on The Tonight Show. Dean put down the phone, relieved. He drove to NBC Studio 1 on a quiet afternoon. The studio was empty, only the spotlights flickering. Dean walked onto the stage, sitting beside the old piano. No audience, no cameras, just him and his memories. He sang "Everybody Loves Somebody," alone. The baritone voice echoed through the vast space. Everybody loves somebody sometime. Everybody falls in love somehow. Each lyric was an affirmation. Fame may fade. Johnny Carson or anyone else may try to embarrass him, but character and friendship will remain forever. Jean and the children came to meet him. They stood at the studio door, listening. Dean Paul clapped when the song ended. "Dad is the best." Dean hugged the whole family, laughing loudly. "Life is short, kids. Love and forgive. That's the biggest hit." The story ended with Dean Martin driving home under the California sunset. On the radio, his old hit played. He held Jen's hand, smiling. From a poor Italian boy to a Rat Pack star, from a breakup with Jerry to reconciliation. Dean had proven that, under the harsh spotlight, true self is what matters most.